decade.
Got it.
Cool. So I think everyone's background looks good. Nikita, I think I'll just have it pass on to you when it starts so that you can introduce everyone on the panel, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yep. And then this screen right here that I'm sharing right now, I will put it down once we give some people time to just come on into the webinar, maybe like 1 to 2 minutes. Yep. And then the session is being recorded right now, so that once it gets posted, I'll just share it to Kiri to share online.
So you, if required, you will be sharing the screen, right?
Yeah, the screen is being shared now.
It.
Yeah, but then I'll take it down because I think the focus really is on the panel discussion anyway. So the screen is just for when people are hopping in.
Great.
Fabulous.
I'll kick off at 1 o'clock.
Sure. How are you guys today?
Ethical. How are you? Yeah, good.
Yep, all good here as well. Ready for a nice discussion?
Likewise.
I went to the dentist, but that didn't have anything to do with getting ready for today.
That's what I did yesterday before we chatted.
Yeah.
Mm.
And no massive amounts of Novocaine or anything, right? So no excuses.
That would be rather unethical, my dear.
Yeah. I'm feeling very relaxed.
Okay, I'll start the session now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. September is an exciting month.
Nikita.
Sorry.
So let's wait for people to come in.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. And I'll ping you once we're ready.
So do you have like a string of events around the PR month?
Sorry, is that a question to me?
You know, I'm asking David, Kiri, or Natalie, any one of you. Is this something?
Yeah, we
like
try and do a PRHK event on ethics every year to remind people of the code of conduct.
Okay.
That's quite an important aspect of the job that we do. Yeah. We're a bit late in the month, but we're still in September, so it's still valid.
All right, we have some people streaming in. Nikita, I think we can give the session a start.
Again? Sure, great. So hello everyone, and it's a beautiful day today, beautiful weather in Hong Kong, and thank you for joining in. September marks an exciting month in the PR industry's diary. It's the PR ethics month, and we're here to discuss why the industry really needs a bigger focus on ethics. And if we turn to some recent news for context, recently the leaked internal memos of Shell following a US congressional hearing on into the climate disinformation are quite revealing. And Shell, which has a net zero target for 2050, tells its PR partners in 2020, and I quote, please do not give the impression that Shell is willing to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to levels that do not make any business sense. Well, this exchange goes on, and has, it's replete with environmental commitment, replete with questions on their own environmental commitments and jokes about the climate collapse. Now, no matter which part of the world you're in, I'm sure you'll agree when an issue like this flares up, and an issue which is so relevant flares up, it puts the entire industry under the scanner. Precisely why we need something like this, and we need to spotlight the topic of ethics and reflect on the need to adhere to an industry standard, locally as well as globally. To delve deep into the discussion, we have a very distinguished panel today. Allow me to welcome Kiri Sinclair. Kiri is a highly regarded thought leader, a prominent voice for PR and comms in Hong Kong, as well as Asia. She's the founder of integrated communications agency Sinclair, and very passionate about all things related to DEI. Natalie Siu, thank you for joining us. Natalie is a dynamic public relations expert who started a career as a journalist and has done extensive work across Greater China with various agency and in-house roles like FTI Consulting, Edelman, AIA, Zurich Insurance, and more recently, she joined Sandpiper Communications as a GM in the Hong Kong team and deals with a host of healthcare clients. And finally, we have David Ketchum. David, thank you for waiting patiently. You're the undisputed voice of innovation in Hong Kong communications, in the Hong Kong communications scene, and with 25 years of experience across APAC and nearly 30 years in marketing and consulting internationally, David wears many hats, but to name a few, he's the founder of Current Asia, a respected author and a passionate PR figure in Hong Kong. If we can begin the discussion with you, David, and let's start with the issue of greenwashing and partnering with big oil. What are your thoughts on the issue? Should PR agencies cancel or counsel energy giants?
Well, I do believe that any business that is legal and is allowed to operate in the countries or markets in which it does business deserves to have good communications representation, whether that's in-house or out of house. So for me, there may be personal decisions that one may choose to make about types of companies, whether it's energy or a particular type of pharmaceutical, or I don't know, you get into alcohol or tobacco or vaping or whatever, but those are really personal choices. And so the ethical choice comes more not from the legality of it or not, but more the behavior with which you handle those clients. And I do believe that every company deserves to have proper representation in the court of public opinion, whether that's to help them tell their story or handle a crisis or manage an issue, for sure. And then the ethical dimension comes in really in how you behave as a communications professional when handling that account or that company. And I think we'll explore that a little bit more as the conversation goes on.
Kiri, what do you have to add? Do you have a different point of view over here?
It's such an interesting question, and it really is the global question of the day. Who should we be working for and not? And I do agree with David that across the many different industries and issues that are out there, everyone has the right, as long as it is legal, to speak up. And many people do need assistance with how to share their messages and the way that we go about sharing those messages, what is said, making sure that it's true and accurate and authentic, and that there isn't any undue pressure being put in any direction. That's really, really important. On the other hand, there's also my own moral boundaries. And so for myself, no, I do not work with big oil. I never have, I never will. And I have a lot of other very strong moral red lines that myself and Sinclair as an agency stands by. There's some areas that we don't work in terms of industries and in terms of geographies. And of course, that's not necessarily something that any agency really wants to say exactly where that line is, but internally we certainly do know. But again, I don't believe that canceling is the answer. However, it's not something that I could stand by and talk about.
David, if everyone deserves a counsel, it's that kind of questioning that if a patient is ill, they go to a doctor and the doctor refuses to treat them because you work for a big oil company. It could be something like that. But I want to understand from you that how can PR companies then avoid the performative green campaigns and communicate their actions more authentically?
Well, exactly. I think that and to use that sort of analogy of the lawyer again, I think every company deserves the right to tell their story about their journey, either towards net neutral or to explain their current situation. And I think it's important for companies not to let the narrative or the storytelling get ahead of the facts, which is maybe what we heard a little bit in that Shell situation. And I guess the most, I guess I'm getting into strategy, but the key to telling a good story without greenwashing is to clearly state where you are today and what your objective is in the future and how you intend to get from here to there. So you could be the most polluting company in Hong Kong, but you could be forgiven if you were on a timed journey to a better state. And you regularly were transparent with stakeholders about your progress along that journey. And from my perspective, I don't smell any whiff of greenwashing in that kind of behavior. For example, if you're a utility looking to wean itself away from coal, on what type of schedule over what time period, and then you report regularly to stakeholders about your progress against that. I think it's perfectly legitimate to promote that. And then also, looking across the whole enterprise, are you switching to hybrid vehicles? How else are you seeking to, reduce, recycle, or save energy in various ways? So I guess that's my ethical distinction. And then greenwashing would be, or astroturfing, I also like that term, with the artificial green grass. Where that becomes unethical is where you're telling a story that is divergent from the reality of where you are, and that could be disinformation, or it could be just talking in ways that are coherent but don't have any basis in fact. So kind of making a donation to a charity and making a big deal about it, but then not actually changing the way that you do business. And things like that, I would consider that unethical behavior.
Yeah. You speak of a timeline. So, what is that timeline to you which looks ethical? If Shell is saying that their net zero target is 2050, does the planet have another 30 years?
Yeah.
Should the timeline be 10, 20
Yes.
years, like something achievable, something in the near future?
Well, I'm laughing because these things are difficult. And maybe, Carrie, you and I differ slightly on this, and that makes for a more interesting panel discussion than just always agreeing. But I stopped this morning and filled my petrol fueled car up at Shell. So I'm not going to get too high on my horse about about.
And I think that just to jump in there on David, I think that that's the point. It takes the full community. And so, for example, in bringing it back to a very Hong Kong example, we have a recycler that's kind of losing its premises, so to speak. And, it's all getting blamed on one entity, but actually it should really be looked at as a community-wide. We all need to be investing in our own recycling. We all need to be investing in a future where we're not focused on big oil, right?
Absolutely.
We all need
Absolutely.
to be taking the steps ourselves to reduce, our own use. And interestingly, I was talking to a very, very intelligent futurist the other day who was talking about, this is slightly off topic, but those who know me know that that's where I tend to go, but who was talking about, think about if everyone just turned the lights off, right? And the little things that technology can do, for example, building, we talk about smart city. Think about a smart building whereby if someone's out of the room for 5 minutes, the lights turn off and they turn back on when you walk in. How much that could save. And so I think the conversation is a lot bigger than just kind of attacking the suppliers that are actually keeping our economy going. It's much more about each and every single one of us playing our part. So I'm a little bit hesitant about really kind of going on the attack on big organizations like that.
Yes.
But then to say there are areas where personally, myself or other individuals within our team perhaps don't want to go, but that can also be because that's not necessarily the expertise that we grew up with or know, and so it's not that interesting.
Yes.
I do have friends who are passionate about working in this area because they want to be a part of the change.
Yes. And Nikita, to your question about timeline, getting companies to stop pouring cooking oil down drains that eventually end up in the harbor is a more addressable issue and can happen on a shorter timeline than changing the SAR's dependence on coal for power generation, right? So I think in terms of communications, it's really just in terms of being transparent about, sometimes it takes a while to turn a giant oil tanker around, and a speedboat can move quicker. So I think it's more about the transparency of the timeline and the expected results on what kind of timeline, rather than whether it's long or slow, because some things just take a long time.
Natalie, we'll move a little away from this issue. And Natalie, I want to bring you into the discussion. What is your take on the matter and advice to PR professionals in general when it comes to ECG and sustainability and greenwashing?
I feel that I guess I have one point to add, like further to what David and Kiri just discussed. Obviously, many corporate state talked about, I think, the specific timeline, like by when then they aim to achieve like carbon neutrality, so on and so forth. But I guess as communicators, what's really important, I personally feel quite strongly as being, I guess, like ethical in terms of the work that we advise and plan and also deliver for them, especially when it comes to external communications, is really, I think, helping them or do our job to, I think, do the sort of right fact finding, like the discovery, to actually dig out the specific, I think, substance and all the steps that they actually have in place to work towards that goal. That's a lot more important than just saying, oh, by 2050, we aim to be da da da. And that's really where I personally feel very strongly about like ethical communication, because I guess at times, maybe like obviously in that very broad communication spectrum, some of the work that our peers do might be more, I think, in the marketing communications bucket, which could be, I think, a bit different from, say, when you engage media, when you're trying to articulate what the client they are doing, I think, more from a corporate communications perspective. And for myself and our firm, we do a lot more, I think, more in the corporate comm space and media engagement. So I feel that everything that we help them, be that like the narrative or say any case studies, that all need to be fact-based, evidence-based. That's extremely important. And that's what I see, I think, part of one of the very important, I guess, building blocks or the key elements, ingredients when we talk about being ethical, like when it comes to helping our client articulate the messages.
You're talking about media engagement. I'll step in and ask, and what are the gray areas when it comes to pitching to journalists? The industry is, yes, morally obliged to build good relationships with the media on behalf of the clients. But in your opinion, what are the examples of crossing the line, the moral red line?
I would say that personally, I work quite a lot with financial services companies. It could be like asset managers, insurance companies, financial data providers, so on and so forth. I feel that the transparency or the honesty when it comes to dealing with the journalists in really giving them the full picture, because obviously each organizations, I mean, each of our clients, they have their own commercial or business objectives, which kind of also, I guess, shape what their communications objectives are, right? So when we deal with the journalists, I think we need to be very transparent in terms of actually what's the broader context. I tend to approach it, I think, from a very kind of open, transparent manner to tell them, look, like, that's a full picture, that's the market landscape, and actually where that specific client they sit in that, I guess, like on that particular agenda. And I would say that would help to eliminate, be that same miscommunication or say any sort of misunderstanding when it comes to actually interpreting what the client share with them. And that then actually, I think if we look at like the consequence of what's the impact, then that comes down to actually what's the message or the information, the accuracy of the information that the mass audience or the specific target audience that they get, right, through that particular piece of article. So that's how I see it.
David, you wanted to add something?
I'd like to talk about money. One of the most corrupting influences that leads to unethical behavior is money and greed. And certainly in public relations, one of the founding principles of our credibility as an organization is that we clearly, we're getting paid for our services, either in-house or at agencies as consultants. And clearly, if you run a press conference, you have to hire a ballroom at the Hyatt Hotel, and it's clear that money is being spent. But it's really important that money not change hands in ways that provide undue influence or fear or intimidation or monopolize on somebody's misfortune or a weak position. And that's something. If you look at the code of conduct for the organization, for PRHK, that's an important part of that we should, if we're paying for something, like for example, if you have you've hired a brand ambassador to endorse your product, it's important that you make it clear that that person is a brand ambassador and that they didn't just wake up one day and endorse the product. They found it interesting. And similarly, we always see that boundary between advertorial and editorial. So if you read a really interesting, 5-part series in a Hong Kong newspaper, you might find that actually that was a piece of sponsored advertorial or editorial or whatever you want to call it. And those lines are getting increasingly blurred as I noted, when we go from social media to either conventional broadcast or print media, where it's increasingly unclear who's paying who and who's accepting money from who. So it's really important for professionals not only to have their own sense of ethics, sort of common sense and good behavior, but also to follow the industry codes of practice. Because when this industry goes down the line of doing nothing but paying people, then I think not only have we crossed an ethical line if we're not transparent, but also we've undermined a lot of what we have said the value of this business is, which is great storytelling and building strong connections between people and companies.
Yeah, and earning influence, not paying influence. That PR and strategic communications is very much based on earned influence, and therefore when it is paid, it does need to be acknowledged as paid, as part of our job. And I think that if we're talking about those moral red lines, as we were, I think another big one is how we treat people, all individuals, the people that businesses employ, and the people that we represent within our customer base, the people within our stakeholder groups. And bringing this back to the Hong Kong perspective, seeing news yesterday that a government social media site wrote a post or used a comic to put a transgender woman in a very awful situation within that comic. That is unethical, just to be very clear. And diversity, equity, and inclusion needs to be front and center in all communications. Everyone must be treated with kindness and respect. There is no room for racism or genderism, if that's what you call it, or such, right? I think that it's really time that we acknowledge that men and women are equal. They should be equally represented. They should be equally paid. They should be equally promoted, and so forth. Ageism is an issue, whether one is older or younger, they should be promoted and honored by talent and skill and experience. But one of the big issues that we tend to find in Hong Kong is much more around ethnicity and gender, and sexuality. So, people have a choice to, in my opinion, be who they are authentically and live their true self. I mean, that's what this next generation asks to be respected for. That's, the most humble thing we can do for this next generation is honor that request that people want to be authentic, which means we need to let them show up authentically wherever they are, and we need to represent them authentically. So not only in, say, the agency or team that you have control over, but in the copy that you're putting out, in the creative and the messaging, it needs to be really front and center around equality, around diversity and around inclusion. So making sure that representation is out there and is fair.
You know, you bring up this very interesting angle on ageism. As owners of big PR companies, I would like to ask you, how open are you to working with KOLs who are, forget about 40s and 50s, who are in their 30s? Because the latest trend is that, you know, you're over 25, maybe you're out of business as a KOL.
I love the Asian silver KOLs that are coming out. Like, they are absolutely my favorite. And I think about, you know, 10 years ago, maybe we did this fabulous influencer campaign with a tourism board, it was, where we had an influencer in her 30s and her grandma go on a you know, multi-generational holiday together. And it's just so amazing what comes out of people's mouths, right? Because we're all stuck in our own, in many ways. I speak for myself mostly. I am stuck in my generation. My head is stuck in my generation, right? And I have some insight into, you know, the current school leaders, because I've got interns in my office, and I have some insight into not so young women. I think if I put it any other way, she'll kill me. But because I have a mother in that age group, right, that I spend a lot of time with. And, you know, for other age groups that I don't necessarily spend a lot of time with, I need to do a lot of research or make sure my team does, to make sure we represent them correctly.
David, would you work with senior influencers who are not necessarily for family specific brands or family specific topics, or, you know, for fashion and the regular things? Would you work with senior influencers?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in my business, I'm very data driven. So it's about mapping the personas. Who is it that you're trying to engage with, and what kinds of people and attributes do they find interesting and attractive, so you can join those relevant conversations, you know, using influencers. So that isn't necessarily aligned with age at all, right? It could be, I mean, if you think about business to business deals and communications, which is we do quite a lot of, you know, quite often it's the most senior person who has the most authoritative voice, but it could also be the youngest person in the room who, you know, is innovative and isn't bringing a lot of baggage along with them. So yeah, for me, it's age independent. And then we just need to also be careful and considerate to understand both the people that we're working with and also the audiences that we're reaching, and be understanding of their degree of sophistication. So if you know, Justin Bieber aside, if a 14-year-old is offered a huge contract to endorse something, do they really understand what that means, and make sure that that they're properly represented? And then also, you know, when marketing to people who are not of maturity, or who may, you know, be at a certain stage in their life where their mental faculties are not quite what they were before, to make sure that you're clear about what's on offer and what the communication is, to not take advantage of either, you know, youth or age in that situation.
Natalie, if I can turn to you and address the gender equality issue further. When it comes to female leadership, female representation in senior leadership, and equal salary, how much of an issue is this in Hong Kong?
I would say when it comes to client work, again, more in the broader financial services space, that's one quite interesting observation. It's a recent real example that our team experienced. So that's one, the global asset manager, they do have a female executive who's very senior. But it's quite interesting that the brief that we got is, okay, for this senior lady, we were briefed to task to actually kind of map our media program. It's like the client was having some fixation around putting her on all the like women leadership related kind of like sessions, etc. But internally, we actually had quite a good discussion. We feel quite strongly that, look, I mean, if like the fact that she's at that level, that means that she has the right industry knowledge or the expertise. Basically, she's checked all the boxes, right, to be able to get to that level. And why should we only focus or map a program that's just for women leadership? Should be equal, as simple as that. Yes. I think that's a pretty good example to kind of speak to the point that like we as a communicator, actually, I think we need to be able to kind of break through kind of that boundary first, so that when it comes to, I think, shaping, devising a communications program for our clients, then we wouldn't be part of that blockage, or like we are not like reinforcing that gender inequality, right? So I think this is quite an interesting example to address your point. And actually, there's another thing that I feel that like early on when we had the pre-discussion, we all shared or touched on, actually there are quite some challenges in terms of defining what's ethics, like what's ethical. And obviously there are different factors that shape this definition, right? Like for people like the practitioners in the industry, I think experience that's actually quite an important aspect, because sometimes I think younger or greener practitioners, they don't know that what they don't know. And part of your experience actually inform how you define or how you judge that specific situation. Is that ethical or not? And I'm trying to do a little bit of promotion for our education and mentorship committee at PRHK. And that's the reason why we've been trying to, I think, do a bit more outreach, because I think how we actually nurture or educate or I think share a bit more with the younger generation does impact, I think, the future of the industry and people's, I think, perception or their interpretation or how they define what's ethical.
David, do you want to add something?
Oh, that just really resonates with me, because I guess it would be a very hopeful view of humanity if we just assume that everyone had their own kind of nuclear powered ethics device in them that turned on the moment they were born, and we were all perfectly calibrated and aligned about what behavior we should have or not have. But as Natalie said, you know, people earlier in their careers might just not have the experience or the context to know that they're walking into a very gray area or something that has, you know, potential, you know, opportunities for unethical behavior. And then also, you know, as communications professionals, we're an industry. And so to have a professional code of conduct, as PRHK does, it takes the definition of ethical behavior out of the realm of, well, you know, good people will behave in good ways, and actually codifies it, and looks at really kind of the specific touch points that relate to what we do every day, like relationships with clients, relationships with media, you know, the way that we handle facts, the way we handle confidential information, the way we handle, you know, fear and favor and influence. And so, yeah, I think these are all very important points. And it's, you know, much more concrete in our industry than just saying, of course, everybody needs to behave in an ethical way, in the right way. And I'm sure we all know what that is. So it's super helpful to have that that codified in a professional code of conduct.
And I think, sorry, I was just going to add in, and I think that we have to be very realistic that we live in a very multicultural city, and that people bring culture into ethics. And I think that by having a industry standard that's equal across the industry that everyone can refer back to, we can make sure that no matter your cultural or background, everyone understands one point of, you know, where the line is and what that is. The problem there is that it gets interpreted by different people in different ways. And I think that the more that we can educate and teach, and especially those who have many years of experience and have gone, you know, kind of lived through questionably ethical moments and gotten to the other side of them, can share that, you know. And there's some of us that have had moments that perhaps in hindsight weren't as ethical as we wish they were, right? And hindsight is a fabulous thing. And those mistakes are also important to share because that allows us to kind of all learn, shall we say.
So Kitty, how do you in your team, how do you continually train and educate the younger staff on ethics?
I think it has a lot to do with, I was going to say the word calling out, but I don't mean it that way, but questioning. It's about making sure that any content that is done is checked and checked again, so that there's 3 different people. It doesn't matter about hierarchy so much as points of view, that content is checked and made sure that there are different perspectives upon it. That people are able and open to listen to feedback and take it constructively, that feedback is only given in a constructive way, because then people can feel like they can speak out, right? And when people aren't feeling that they can speak out, that means they're not saying when they're in trouble or when they feel something isn't right. They're just going and doing it rather than saying, hey, should we really be doing this, right? I think that's very, very important. So it's the culture in which you work and the culture that you have with your clients. So, from our perspective, it's just remembering at all times, the client pays the agency for their expertise. So just sitting there and doing what the client says is not value for money for your client. They're paying you to have a perspective. They're paying you to have different points of view and to have a conversation and discussion around that. Very, very important that culture, that atmosphere is alive on a daily basis. And also, I think that within an agency or any team setting, another way to bring ethics into the everyday is through experience. So through working together to go clean a beach, to understand what sustainability really means, right? To go and, feed the homeless, to build someone a house, to, there's lots of different things working on NGO projects that can really help a team understand where those ethical lines are. It gives them kind of a knowledge base for it. And so we've always been very generous with our time around NGOs and charity and so forth, because there's so much learning within that area for each of us as individual people, but it does help, I personally believe, on an ethical journey.
What is your approach, David?
Well, I guess, everyone paid a lot of money to watch this webinar, so I better give some value for money. I have a very pragmatic and I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm also a skeptic as well. And I think, one of the magic things about our profession is really to be clever with the use of information and to help clients and companies and organizations come up with points of view and join conversations that they might otherwise be left out of. So I do think this whole discussion of ethics is particularly important because you don't want to bring a tennis racket to play on a basketball court. You have to know what the ground rules are and the game that you're playing. And most clients come to us because they believe, as a profession, because they believe we can add value to their business or help them take advantage of opportunities or solve problems by positioning a product or positioning an issue or dealing with a situation in a particular way where we use the power of communications to actually change people's minds or capture their hearts or change a situation. So I think the part of the real importance of ethics is knowing the difference between being clever and being devious. Because if we just come to work and make long lists of facts and put them into press releases and create websites with the truth on them, that alone is not going to achieve the objectives that we're setting out to do. We actually have to take those ideas and put them together in interesting ways and turn them around and say things that are unexpected and make sharp and pointed arguments as well. So yeah, I think for me that's where for me, that's where, in a very pragmatic way, that's where ethics fit in the mix. Is we are paid to be, sharp and swift and sometimes aggressive, and then ethical practice, helps us understand where those lines are and when not to cross them.
What would be an example for when you're being clever and when you're being devious?
Well, this is not a specific Hong Kong example, but if you think about the discussion around abortion, and some people call it the right to life, all right, and other people call it the right to choose. And two sides have framed up that argument in completely different ways. If you look at that discussion as it's going on, and I'm not going to make a comment on the topic itself, but rather from a rhetorical point of view, both sides have the right to tell their story that reinforces that point in a factual way. But if you start introducing disinformation, for example, into that discussion, and you provide what appears to be facts, that disprove the other side's perspective or side of the argument, and they're false, then clearly that's unethical. So just framing up a debate or a discussion one way or another, and then very purposefully backing that up is entirely ethical. And then using dirty tricks within that strategy is unethical.
Now, there's also this issue of bringing personal ethics to work. Kiri, how do you deal with a situation where an employee's personal ethics are at conflict with the brands or the companies?
Yeah, and that's so interesting. So we start by doing a tracker across the agency. We ask everyone across 10 industries what's their preferences, and we try and map people towards their preferences. However, you do get, and I'm going to kind of shout out the easy conflicts rather than the harder ones, but you do get people who are really, really keen on F&B. They want to work in hospitality, but they're vegan, right? Well, you can't go and have them open a steakhouse. That would not be, in my opinion, ethical, unless they were okay with it, right? There's the area of alcohol as well. There's a lot of people who don't drink, whether it's for personal or religious reasons. And again, having them represent an alcohol account would not be, in my opinion, ethical. And so we do give people somewhat of a choice where we can. Of course, there's always the accounts that you'd rather work on and rather not, which is a little bit different than an ethical line. But we do acknowledge those ethical lines. We always make sure that we invite people to work on accounts. We want people with passion to be excited about their client partnerships, right? So forcing someone to work on something that they're not interested in is really not a great idea, and perhaps suggests either the recruitment process isn't working, that you're not hiring the right people for the type of organizations you're working with, or that on the business development side, you're not attracting the right organizations for what your people want to work with. Because at the end of the day, an agency is only the people in the room.
And Natalie, I want to turn to you and understand that in your line of work, what are the other gray areas when it comes to, you did speak about pitching to journalists, but what are the other gray areas you encounter which cross the ethical boundaries?
I guess maybe I can share a little bit in terms of when it comes to issues or crisis management. Because obviously in those quite distressed situations, clients, they do have their very clear objective, right? That's basically, I think, to mitigate any potential damage around that reputation and really to protect the reputation. But that said, there are also quite some, I would say, gray area. If we take a step back, I think let's not just focus on the result, but look at the process, but how we actually work with the client. Yeah. I think as a communicator, like whether or not we have the courage, the guts to actually, I think, make some constructive challenge during that fact-finding process. Because if we only take what the client they give us and then just believe that, oh, those are the truth, those are all the facts that we have, then we present it, and then I personally feel that there's a gap in terms of the ethical practice. because probably we haven't tried hard enough to really, I think, live up to the expectation of our profession. And I guess there's also a little bit of like maybe sidetrack bit there. There could also be many other questions around, oh, but hold on a sec. Actually, we should also be protecting the interests of our clients, right? That's also part of the code of ethics. So obviously, I think there is some tension, or it could be very complicated, very complex. And it's really that every situation varies, and it could be so different. But the key is really, I think, have we really tried our best to ask all the right questions and try the very best to actually extract and like dig in and find out all the facts. If we haven't even tried or did not try, then I feel that's unethical. And it's really, I think, to challenge the clients, look, that's what you give us, but actually, like, we do need to, I think, scrutinize the so-called the facts that's presented in order to really find out whether or not there might be any gaps or maybe there's some flaws, right? And obviously that would impact, I think, the whole program in terms of how we deal with that situation, the issue. Yeah, and I personally actually dealt with a situation assignment that's a shareholder dispute. And it's quite clear you have those two parties, obviously the client and then like the other side, right, the other party. And what the client presented or shared, that's for their own interest, right? So like, again, during internal discussion, when we were devising the program, we raised many, many questions. So that's really, I think, the right thing to do in a crisis situation. Not that we are not like trying to be, I guess, like in line with the client's interests, but I still think that like, regardless, yes, we are paid, but we need to do the right thing, rather than just blindly stick to like what we were fed.
And I think that that brings up a really important point, which is a lot of time we're working with a client who is so into their own bubble. They're stuck inside it. They can't see another perspective. And we are that other perspective. So it is, the onus is on us, not just to say, yes, I agree with you, we'll do what you say, but rather reflect back the truth, do the research, understand what's actually happening, understand what the perspective of different audience groups is, and share that back with the client so that they can really devise a program towards the best outcomes. Really, it's so easy these days to be stuck in a bubble, and we can see that on a national level, but you know, you can also see that on an organizational level. You speak to someone who works for a really big brand that has a, you know, internal cheerleader team, right? And they all, you know, if they've worked there long enough, they just speak the brand language, even when you're out having drinks, right? So yeah, no, it really is our job to make sure that we're able to share that truth, the real light, with those clients so that they can help see outside that bubble and make sure that they're communicating correctly. And sorry, also to remember that the client isn't always, you know, their perspective isn't always in their best interest. They just don't necessarily know it. And that's why they're appointing an agency, oftentimes, is to help them work in their own best interest, right? To have someone who can represent them without too much of the emotion and such getting in the way.
We're running short on time, so I'll ask for the concluding question and then open the discussion to the audience. What should the pillars of ethics be for the PR industry? If all of you can have your say. We'll begin with you, David.
I guess the pillars. So I guess the first is truth is essential. And then the second is around transparency around financial dealings. The number of times people have come to us and said, you can have this account, but you have to make a certain fee contribution back to one of the decision makers. That kind of thing is completely unacceptable. So sort of truth and transparency. And then I think the last part is consistency, which is truly important, because as a reputation driven industry. You know, we're both dealing with our clients and companies' reputations, but we're also dealing with our own personal company and industry reputation. You know, without that consistent ethical behavior, we can very quickly, you know, tear down our effectiveness to represent our clients. So truth, transparency, and consistency.
Natalie, if you can go next.
I guess I add honesty on top of what David shared. Yeah, so I'll just keep this short because I guess like in the last 40-50 minutes we touch on lots of ground. Yeah, I would add honesty.
And Kiri?
I say this often, but everything that David said, I agree with David. But was I pointing the right way? I agree with David. And that honesty, I think, is very important because again, there's the cultural interpretation of you know, what telling the truth is. And so, you know, as both David and Natalie mentioned there's telling the truth and there's transparency. So not only do you not lie, you also say everything, tell the whole story. What I would like to add on top of that is people. I think that we as an industry, we are people, we work for people to tell other people about stories about people. It's all human. And so we need to be very mindful of the people that we work with, work for, represent, and at the end of the day, may affect by the work that we do. So if you're talking about doing work for an NGO, there may be positive outcomes for the people that are, you know, the purpose of that NGO. But then there's other organizations that cause mass amounts of plastic waste or pollute in some other way, and we have to be mindful of those outcomes as well, positive and negative, that are part of the, you know, because we become part of the work of the organization we're working for. And so if you are doing a lot of work within areas where say plastics are involved, are you also doing a lot of work to save the oceans, to balance that out? You know, I really do think that that kind of perspective and putting people into that mix to help that balance is an important part of our ethical journey, and actually is something that is spoken about so much more if you think about the last decade to those before. Yeah.
Great, very interesting discussion. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, I'd like to ask one final question. Does the PR industry have it easy? You know, when doctors and lawyers, they cross a line, they have the law to deal with, whereas you have a guideline.
No, I think that in some professions there are regulated standards. And so for a lawyer, for a doctor, for an astronaut, they have a set of standards. They have, for example, with law, you have to pass the bar, you know, and so forth. And that makes that journey very easy in a sense. I mean, it's a hard journey, but you know what the steps in the ladder are, right? What we have is a code of conduct for a profession, which is really up to the professional to opt in. So for example, with PRHK, we as organizations that are members have opted into this code of conduct, right? And that is means that we opt in, we read it, we educate on it, we stand by it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire industry does. So in that way, we often see headlines around PR where PR is blamed for things, you know, and this is a good point to kind of bring up Bell Pottinger, which, you know, it's been 5 years now, and what happened there. And that brings the whole industry down. And there are people like us here who have been working our hearts out and dedicated our careers to public relations that get dragged down by that. And I believe that if we had, you know, there's pros and cons for higher standards. And I do believe strongly that a code of conduct that is an opt-in code of conduct, as we have, is the correct mode for our profession. But what it does mean is that we do have to be cautious about how we individually act, all of our employees act, and encourage others within our profession to act that way, because there isn't an outside body that's going to regulate that.
Final thoughts, David?
Well, I agree with Carrie, as she would say. I think that was very articulate and put it very well. I just would say that public relations is one of the few professions where even the name sometimes is used to mean spin or dishonesty or something slightly sinister in the way the truth is presented, right? You do hear people sometimes, hear a politician say something and, they shout back at the TV and say, oh, that's just PR, right? And so I definitely agree with Carrie that as an industry, we have a huge responsibility for self-governance. Although we obey all rules and regulations and laws that relate to the business that we do, just obeying those laws is not enough to keep us on the straight and narrow. So I would leave it there that as a self-regulated industry, a code of practice is very important to help give teeth to that credibility for our industry.
Natalie, final thoughts from you?
I guess if everybody in the industry every day when they do the plan work, they bring the whole, I guess obviously there could be very level of that interpretation or definition, but if that's something that they bring it to life every day, whenever they deal with all the different stakeholders, then I'm very optimistic that I think it will just get better. Yes.
Brilliant, amazing discussion. Thank you so much, you all, for your time. And it's a great start to become comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. But what's most important is that action must continue in the remaining 11 months and not just talk for 1 month of the year. And if we can all agree, the fact is that there has to be, there's a need for safe spaces to have such conversations and discuss these challenging issues, and even with your younger staff and with your newer staff to revise the codes of conduct and educate the client as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikita.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who joined us.
Thanks,
well.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.